Hi, I'm Cecilia Knapp and I'm the Young People's Laureate for London, and this is KnappChats edition 3. So KnappChats is a series of videos of in conversations that I've been rolling out over my year as the Young People's Laureate, and the idea is basically to talk to a young writer whose work I love. So I hope that giving space to some great writers doing incredible things with their creativity, and hearing a range of different perspectives and different journeys into writing will help with my job as Young People's Laureate about raising the visibility of poetry for more young people and helping more young people see poetry as a space for them to explore and enjoy. So I hope hearing from a range of writers who have all found themselves where they are now in different ways can highlight and celebrate and encourage the diversity of the writing world. So this time our guest, as you might be able to see, is the wonderful Toby Campion. Toby is a phenomenal writer, funny, frank, innovative, sensitive and tender. And he's also a seasoned performer, having reached the finals of the World Poetry Slam. And his collection, which is one of my all-time faves, Through Your Blood, is published by Burning Eye. I highly recommend that you read this. It looks at themes of sexuality, coming of age, the body, in really, really original ways, in a voice that feels incredibly unique and refreshing. It was longlisted for the Polari First Book Prize and highly commended in the Forward Prizes 2019. That's a big deal. Toby is also the director of Unislam, which we will hear a little bit more about later. And he's also just an all-round legend. Toby, hello, welcome to KnappChats.
Hello, what an intro. Thank you.
It's always a bit cringe doing an intro when the person that you're talking about is sitting right there on Zoom, just like this. But you deserve all of those accolades. First question I ask all of my guests on KnappChats is, how the hell are you?
Oh, bloody hell. Yeah, all right. A bit tired, a bit hay fevery. But I'm all right at the moment. Yeah, got a week off now, and I'm going to go and see my sister in Sheffield. So looking forward to that.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah, my nephew. But yeah, all right in general. It's obviously a little bit weird, isn't it? But looking forward to being out of lockdown at some point.
Yeah, the end is in sight, inching closer, and then getting moved away a little
Inching, skirting back, coming
Yeah.
forward, back. Yeah.
So maybe let's start with you telling us a little bit about what you've been up to lately. Obviously, as you've already mentioned, it's a bit of a weird time still, and it has been an incredibly stressful, challenging time for a lot of people. What have you been up to, and how has writing and creativity been for you in this strange year that we've had?
It's been ups and downs. In some ways it's been really good. In some ways it's been really hard. I was on my own right at the start of the lockdown, in my flat, which was actually really nice and focused me a lot. I think I've actually been quite productive in some ways this year. During periods, it's also been it's been quite hard, hasn't it, creatively. I also started outside work. I was working freelance full time, and I guess always seen that as the goal and seen that as what I was working towards. And then I started doing some part-time, well, full-time, then part-time job during the pandemic. And that's actually been really nice to have something completely different to poetry to focus on a little bit. And I've also realized that when you're freelance, you're sometimes just living in a world that's writing, doing workshops, doing gigs, sitting in your room for long amounts of time writing, which isn't necessarily the real world. I don't know. So it's been really good to do that, and be getting out. And in terms of writing, the last month or so I've been kind of focusing on reworking this play and editing a play that I wrote at the start of last year. And trying to allocate some time for poetry next month. Yeah.
Tell us about the play. What's it called? What's it about?
It's at the moment it's called Sonia, and it's about a drag queen and about cancer and about a family dealing with cancer and death in a way that's hopefully not as depressing as it sounds.
Cancer and death.
Yeah, a musical. And I guess also about like the healthcare system and about masculinity and how people deal with disease and becoming infirm and that kind of thing. Yeah.
And is this the first play that you've written? I think you've written another one as well, haven't you, before?
Yeah, I wrote another one a few years ago, which had a run at the Nottingham Playhouse, which was great. That was all a really good experience. And then I wrote a second play, which still is kind of in the drafts. And then this is essentially a third play. And yeah, hopefully it will go. I'm talking to a theatre in London about it, which is cool. So yeah, things are happening.
I'm really excited to hear that. And also, like, I feel when I remember when I wrote my play, I was writing it to kind of avoid a writing block, or like maybe I'd fallen slightly out of love with poetry or something. And what really excited me about it was that I was just working with dialogue, and it was a really new thing. And I remember finding it quite invigorating. And I think like this, we've touched on it slightly, but this last year for creativity, it feels like either people have really like drilled down and like doubled down and become like insanely productive and then posted all about it on social media, and then you feel guilty about not being productive. So it's either people are like incredibly productive, or they're finding the lockdown and coronavirus and everything quite stifling. Like, was you returning to theatre writing some way to mitigate, I don't know, not feeling in a place to write poetry or something?
Yeah, maybe. I got into quite a productive swing with poetry. I mean, it's great for people who found it really stimulating and who were really productive and who decided to post about that. That's excellent. I mean, now talking about it now, I want to talk about the being productive, with the caveat that I also had some really hard times and really unproductive times during the pandemic as well, like everybody has. But eventually I got into quite a good swing with writing and a good habit with writing poetry, and actually feel like even with the periods of not doing as much writing as I wanted to, have written a lot more this year than I've written in a bloody long time, which has been good. But I with playwriting, actually, I was like, I'd been meaning to do that a few months ago, but I'd been in a bit of a rhythm with poetry and concentrating on that. So I had to kind of carve out some time to do the play and edit the play. And it is a different discipline, isn't it? And actually also what I find is, I mean, when I came back to the play, I was kind of bored of it, and I think I'd been putting it off a little bit, but then once I started doing it, I got excited about it again, and I was thinking about ideas and new things to do with it, which is great. So now I'm really into it. And also when you focus on something else, for me anyway, I find that I am then kind of crave writing poetry again, when and you're like, oh yeah, I do like writing poetry. And so I think it's good for that. I find, for me, I go between the two, and rather than trying to do them at the same time, I carve out time for both.
Totally. I think it can sort of re-appetize you, can't it? I also think that, like, I feel the same. Like I managed to get into a bit of a rhythm somehow writing poetry during the lockdown, but I think everyone feels unproductive so much of the time in their own head. Everyone's always telling themselves they're not doing enough, and particularly with social media, all you need to do is log on and it feels like everyone's writing poetry 12 hours a day, burning the midnight oil, like staying up drinking black coffee and writing poetry. And then my like humble 4 hours on a Monday afternoon of writing time feels like lacking or insignificant in some way, you know?
Yeah.
How did you get into writing in the first place? Let's take it back.
It was a Monday morning, December 99. No, I've always written bits and bobs, always written like little stories and poems and stuff. Always, or not always kept a diary, but attempted to keep a diary, or just found that writing things down was a way for me to get them off my chest. And then I didn't really experience poetry. I didn't like poetry at school. Very dry, very dissected. Wasn't really interested in it. And then I was working in America for a summer and went to visit someone who I'd become friends with, and he introduced me to spoken word for the first time. And I remember I was thinking about this today. He was trying to. I'd never heard of it before, and he was like, "Oh, it's kind of like drama monologue, kind of poem, kind of writing." And I was like, oh, "That sounds shit." I was like, "That sounds really rubbish." But I was like, "I'll go along and support him," and went to this thing, and it ended up being a poetry slam. I was just like, wow, I didn't even know this existed. And just the interaction with the audience and how funny it was and how moving it was. And that was my first experience really of poetry in a lot, like living poetry. And just kind of fell in love with it, and had realized that I'd kind of been writing things like that to some extent. And so then after that kind of got into it. Had never really planned to be a writer. I studied linguistics, and I think I was probably going to go into speech and language therapy. My mum did that, my auntie did that, and I kind of assumed that I would probably just do that as well. And then got into poetry, and then as a result of that, playwriting, and that's I guess how it came about really.
So after you'd seen that first initial kind of iteration of just people speaking poems on a stage, did you think, okay, I'm already kind of doing this, how do I get into this back in the UK? And did you find some sort of workshop, or like what was the next step after that first kind of taste of it?
Yeah, so I came back to Edinburgh where I was living and started writing stuff on my own. Didn't tell anyone, didn't show anyone for maybe a year. And started going to, I think I went to a slam at Edinburgh in the Students' Union just to watch it. And then the friend of mine who was in America came over to the UK about a year later, and I showed him this poem, and I was just like so nervous. And he was really encouraging. And then I subsequently studied for a year abroad in America and really got into it there. So then I started going to kind of slams, open mic things, and kind of got into it there. And then when I came back to the UK, did the same, started going to open mics, taking part in slams, and just I guess worked my way into my craft of it. Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about this some more. So both me and you came to where we are now through the kind of spoken word scene. So I guess through I mean, there's lots of different ways to kind of define spoken word, isn't there? I mean, I would argue that sometimes it feels a little bit reductive to like ring fence styles of poetry, but I guess we came to what we do now through going to a night where people tended to be on stage without even a book or anything, just a microphone, speaking like a 3-minute piece, right? And then there's slams that people can do that really invigorate and energize the kind of poetry community. But I find sometimes I notice that there's a real tendency to kind of split poets into whether you're a performance poet or whether you're a page poet. And it feels like you approach those two different things from two very different journeys. And I wonder what you think about that. I mean, it's a big question, the old like page stage divide, but do you think there's a divide? And is it Is it useful? Yeah, that's my question. A big one.
Oh, no, I mean, yeah, I do think there is or has historically been a divide. Yeah, I think, like you say, actually just saying spoken word, there's actually so many parts to that, to poetry that is stage focused or performance focused first, rather than being completely focused on the page to begin with. I didn't even really think about my poems on the page when I was starting out. I was just thinking about them and how they sounded, and in terms of, like, you know, rhyme or rhythm, and not really how they looked on a page. And I think some people would argue that they are, you know, spoken word is as a specific genre within performed poetry, maybe, and other people would say that they're poets and they just happen to perform their work. Yeah, I think it's kind of, yeah, reductive in the sense of, like, what is really, who is it serving, who is that distinction serving, page and stage. And I think, yeah, I go into spaces, and if people know that I have a slam background, I think they think of me in a certain way, or they think of my work in a certain way, maybe.
Yeah, I was going to say that it feels sometimes that definitions are sometimes only used as a way to criticize. So, like, for example, a performance poem will do the rounds on social media because it's been used for the inauguration, for example, Amanda Gorman's poem or something. And instead of just saying, this is one of the branches of the poetry tree, it's labeled as a spoken word piece, and then it's criticized because of it. And I wonder if that's, like, quite frustrating sometimes, because if you're only defining something to criticize it, what's the point? If you're defining something to celebrate it, that's fantastic, because there are so many different styles of poems and they can happily coexist around each other. But if you're going into spaces and people are doing, like, an eye roll because you've got, like, a slam background, I just wonder what the point of that is, you know?
And I think for the last few years I've been really interested in developing poetry which works in both spaces, which is actually really hard, I think, and what each of those can bring to the other space, both, like, in my work, and also, you know, through UniSam and facilitating that with universities, and commissioning, like, the poetry practitioners roundtable and stuff like that, and bringing more spoken word or more stage focused work into more academic spaces or more page focused spaces, maybe. I kind of think it's boring, and I think that I'm interested in, like, blurring that line, as poets before us have. I do think it's, interesting. I think some people, so for example, slam, some people criticize slam as something that homogenizes people's voices, or you know, makes young people feel like they have to pander towards the judges or pander towards a certain thing. And to some, you know, I don't think slam is perfect, and I have critique of slam, and I think to some extent that is true. But I think also, that's quite reductive to people who take part in slam, and actually there's so many unique voices and interesting things going on. And also that happens in the page focus world. And you know, the whole, for example, submitting to magazines and journals or written competitions, essentially you're doing the same thing. You know, you're submitting work to a very small number of people that are telling you whether it's good or bad. And also you've got to remember that people who take part in slam, often in the UK anywhere, at the start of their journey or career, sometimes that's not true, but often it is. So you've got to compare that with people who are page focused in that vein. But I mean, I think, how many times have we, especially at the start of our careers, submitted something to a journal or a magazine or a writing competition that afterwards we thought, you know what, to be honest, that doesn't really represent my style of writing or my wider body of work, but I think it's what's expected from a journal, or I think this particular judge of this competition might vibe with it. And that's doing exactly the same thing as the potential, as people ascribe slam to doing, you know. And I think, at least with a slam, like, the best poet never wins is a is an idiom and is a thing, whereas with, you know, magazines or journals and stuff, you're told that objectively is the best poetry out there, and it's all the sifting is done behind closed doors and not on a stage, and it's not open. So I think that's just as bad as anything else for whittling down things in a certain way, and making things or having the potential to homogenize people's voices in a different way than slam or other, you know, stage focused things do.
Yeah, totally. I think that is so well put. Instead of maybe always trying to kind of dichotomize and define, it's like, and criticize, let's maybe think about having a conversation about the pitfalls or the problems in poetry, you know. And I think that there's bad page poetry and there's bad spoken word. Like that's it's not one is perfect and untouchable and spoken word is bad or cringe or whatever. I really like what you were saying as well about, can we not do both? Like, I came from a spoken word background, so did you. I used to do slams. I don't think that I would be at the position that I am now, which is, I have to admit, like, more focused on my work on the page, purely because that's just me developing and being interested in a new type of craft. Like, I did spoken word for years and years and years, and I never thought about how things looked on the page. So now it excites me to look at how things look on the page. It's just a different kind of branch of my creativity now. But I don't think I would have got here if I hadn't come through spoken word, because I have to admit, I found poetry very intimidating until I found the community where I met you, where I met all of my friends who are writers, where I felt it was this really open, democratized process of finding your feet in poetry. And I feel really grateful for that. So I do still get really protective when people kind of criticize the community, because it's like, no, you know, there is so much good, and I wonder if there's a slight snobbery around it too, because there is a slight double standard. Like the stuff that we did when we were younger is criticized more heavily, I think, than say a magazine or a journal. Can I ask you about Unislam? I think anyone watching or listening would love to know what, because you're the director of Unislam, would love to know what Unislam is and what it's about.
Yeah, so Unislam is the UK National University Poetry Slam and Summit. So teams of uni students from across the UK and Ireland come together for an annual festival. It's based around a slam, so it's a slam competition, but there's also, slam isn't the main part of it really. It's about building community, taking part in workshops, developing your craft, developing your work, meeting new people, and, you know, seeing poetry that you wouldn't have the opportunity to see otherwise from different parts of the country. And then also throughout the year we do other support programs. So we have run a program for post-emerging artists, so people who are past the emerging stage of their career and who are over the age of 25, for whom opportunities are quite few and far between, funded opportunities. So we've supported a group of that, which Cecilia Knapp is part of. And Bridget Minamore and Jamal Mahmood and loads of other brilliant people. And we also run the National Youth Poetry Showcase, which basically brings together a lot of the youth poetry collectives from around the UK, particularly around England. So Roundhouse Poetry Collective, Barbican Young Poets, Young Identity in Manchester, Leeds Young Authors, Beat Fruits in Birmingham, all these groups doing amazing things with writing and young people, bringing them together for a chance to showcase their work and do workshops together and meet one another. So yeah, it's basically all about bringing people together, celebrating poetry, giving people a platform for their voices to be heard on, and amplifying them, really.
It's fantastic. I've been for the last 3 years. Well, obviously this year it was all online, but seeing poets find that community via Unislam is always really special. And I'm one of the tutors for the Roundhouse Collective, so seeing them come up and get to meet collectives from Birmingham, collectives from Manchester, and kind of, you know, hang out and get to know each other and talk about poetry is really special. My last question for you, and then I'm going to ask you to read a piece of poetry that you love before we go, is what would you say to any young people that wanted to get into writing, and what would you say to them if they saw poetry as a bit of a intimidating space or not a space for them?
Yeah. I mean, I saw it as that, really. For me, I never thought I would be a poet or a writer. I felt like that. I think you just have to give it a go. Try it. If you want to do it, try it. Do it. If not you, then who? You know, if you're not going to do it, who's gonna do it? Someone else who isn't as good as you, babe. You know what I mean? And what else would I say to a young person who wants to do it? I'd say there isn't any necessarily set route into it either. Like, you know, I've kind of stumbled into it. A lot of people I know, a lot of my friends who are writers, came to it from different ways, different routes. And, you know, a lot of people that I know actually didn't do creative writing courses or whatever. They found their own way into it. And also, you know, trying to follow someone else's path won't work for you, because their particular set of circumstances brought them to their style of writing and their way of doing things, and that works for them, but it might not work for you. So I would say do your own thing. And in a similar vein, don't try and, I mean, we all to some extent, especially when we're starting out, emulate certain things or emulate certain people or styles or whatever. But I think find as much as you can your own style and your own way of doing things, and don't be worried if you think, oh, I don't sound like this person, and therefore I can't be as big as them, or I can't be as successful as them, or therefore no one's going to want to listen to my work. You know, if you're worried that you don't sound like Kay Tempest or Holly McNish or whoever it is that's big, that's a good thing, because they're already doing that. You know, you're never going to be as big as those people by trying to do what they do, because they've already done that. But you can be as successful as they are by doing what you do uniquely as well as you can. And I think that was a realization for me, was realizing, I can bring my own humor into my work and my own way of speaking and my own references, and that's only a good thing. That's only a selling point, you know. So I would say, yeah, don't be worried if you don't think if you're writing things that you think are different to other people and not what's popular or not what's interesting, then that's a good thing. And don't be afraid to delve into that, I'd say.
I think that's pretty good advice. Toby, would you mind sharing with us a poem that you have selected, and tell us a little bit about why you chose this writer and this poem before you read it to us?
Yeah, so I've been reading a lot of D.A. Powell recently, and they wrote a trilogy of poetry collections called Tea, Lunch and Cocktails. And I'm just obsessed with it, really, at the moment, or have been reading it during lockdown. And yeah, D.A. Powell is a queer writer who's writing in I think the 90s. Yeah, from the 90s onwards. And he's HIV positive, and that comes up in the work, along with a lot of other things. And yeah, there's just this one poem a lot of the poems really stood out to me, and I kind of became a bit fixated with, and there's this one that I'm going to read now, and it's called Darling, Can You Kill Me With Your Mickey Mouse Pillows? Darling, can you kill me with your Mickey Mouse pillows when I'm a meager man? With your exhaust pipe and hose, could you put me out when I'm a mite, a splinter, a grain, a tatter, a snip, a sliver, a wit, a tittle, habited by pain? Would you bop me on the noggin with a 2x4, the trifle of me pissing myself, slobbering, infantile, or wheezing in an oxygen tent? Won't you shut off the tank? Mightn't you disconnect the cord disconnect the plug, give the cord a proper yank when I lose the feeling in my legs, when my hands won't grip, and I'm a thread, a reed, a rack, a ruin of clap and flux and grip. With your smack connections, could you dose me? As I start my decline, would you put a bullet through me? Angel, no light left that is mine.
Wow.
Yeah.
God. I can see why you love this writer so much, because I can feel little sprinkles of you in there too, with the playfulness of language set perfectly against the kind of severity of subject and tone as well. There's a real nice kind of interplay between that. And I really loved what you said about sort of inventing your own poetics when you were talking about giving advice to young people. Like, you don't have to be the poetry of the past that is kind of serious and I don't know, austere or something. You can be playful when you're approaching these huge subjects as well, and I think that's really important. Toby, thank you so much for being my third guest on KnappChats. You've been amazing, and I hope that you enjoy that week off. You deserve it. Everyone watching, buy Toby's book. It's called Through Your Blood. It's published by Burning Eye. And keep your little eyes out for Toby's upcoming play, let's hope. Thanks so much, Toby, and thanks everybody for watching at home.